All right, so why not zshell? This is something that's been coming up. They're getting this question a lot. People notice that, and I'm glad Kluge is here because Kluge has been really, really helpful over the last 4 days, 3 days, helping me to give zshell a chance again and consider all the different reasons somebody might actually try to use it. I've done other videos on that, but let me just summarize that really quick. Why should you use zshell and why I'm deciding against zshell ultimately? Again, so you really need to pick the best shell for you, and so it comes down to um, what are you going to do with your shell? And there's a lot of people who mix up shell scripting with the interactive shell, and I think that's what causes a lot of misunderstanding and fighting about shells. I mean, and God knows there's a lot of that, right? And in fact, I've written up a thing about my advice against using zshell, and it's pretty hot under the collar. But it was based on something that I misunderstood. So what brought me to zshell in the first place this last week? After having, some have said hated. I no, but I've disliked zshell for a long time because of reasons that I'll get into. But why did I all of a sudden start considering it again? Well, suddenly I realized that so I thought at the time that zshell had parity with Bash, and therefore as an interactive shell, not for shell scripting, it was an option on the table that if it made me more efficient, if it could possibly improve anything on my terminal interaction, God knows I would give it a shot, right? And in the process, I mean, since Kluge is here, in the process I said, well, I don't like zshell because it doesn't have exported functions. It was usually the first thing I would bring up, and he said, oh yeah, it does. They're called auto-loaded, and they're lazy-loaded, which is really awesome. By the way, they're way better. zshell lazy-loaded functions are far superior to the exported functions in Bash. I have no problem saying that right now. But is that enough, right? So that's why I gave it a shot. At the time, I was kind of coming down. I'm super annoyed by the GPL and what the FSF is doing, and I'm trying really hard to consider options that are not related to that. But so that got me kind of hot under the collar and considering all the possibilities. I truly believe that the GNU licensing in some fashion is going to completely be different within 10 years, given the pace of replacements and stuff that's being done in Rust and other alternatives. I think the core GNU utilities will look completely different if it's not, I mean, it'll be a lot of legacy stuff around for sure, but within 5 years, I think the whole landscape is going to be different. Right now, I just look around and see all the stuff that's being developed that is not GPL v3 specifically. And I would go so far as to say that I would predict that Linux itself is not GPL v2 by the end of 2025. I'm going to make a prophecy. Because they have to update the license at some point, and what's going to happen, right? They're not going to go with any of the GPL license. Torvalds has openly said he has committed to, quote, never have anything to do with the FSF again. If you want to give your money to an organization, give it to the EFF. Those are his exact words from the Debian conference. You can look up on YouTube. So given that climate, I was like, okay, let me see what else is out there that's not GPL. And provides a better interactive experience. And the only options on the table were Fish and zshell. There are a lot of crazy alternative awesome shells being developed, including there's one in Rust, there's BusyBox, what was the one? There was one in Go. There's like 2 or 3 in Go, and so the question comes down to interactivity and productivity. Well, so then I got really caught into this, and I was going through it. In fact, you can look at my dot files right now. And I'm kind of in the middle of I've got I thought, well, God, I'll support both, right? I'll have this Bash RC. It's kind of modular. I know it's a sourcing sort of situation, but still, so I have this zshell one here. So I have 2. This is committed. You can go look this up in my github.com/rwx/dot files if you want to. I just recently rebased the whole thing and everything, made it have a clean commit history. And I kept Bash RC around and zshell, and I did a lot of porting with different things, still kind of in flux. But I wanted to, in the process of cleaning it all up, that also got me looking at other shells. And so I tried zshell. And as I was going through it, I started to notice, first of all, I really struggled with getting auto-loaded functions to work, but ultimately I got it to work, and I really, really love it. That's what's in here, by the way. You put your functions in here, and then you auto-load them in your environment using auto-load. I don't have it auto-load in there. It's in one of the files, so someone go find it right now. But the point is that I got it working. And then I moved on. I moved on to the next thing. I was like running zshell, pretty well. And then, the last few to-dos I had were, okay, I need to make my prompt better. And at the time, and I think Kluch might not agree with me on this, but at the time I was like, okay, clearly zshell has, a better syntax for prompts. I will not debate that. It has a much better syntax for prompting. It's got this thing, okay, and it's nice, and I'm sure he's gonna. I actually need to put a fix me in here. Fix me, get cur branch to actually run on every command line. So I struggled to get the prompt. I'm telling you the issue that really was the straw on the camel's back. It wasn't the only issue, and I'm sure I could overcome it, but it really opened my eyes to the main reason I dropped zshell, and I'll get to it. So get the current branch to actually run on every command line. So when you run this, I'm not going to do it, but when you run this, what you do is it gets the branch, but it doesn't update the branch if the branch updates. It just caches the one that's there, and I absolutely know that there's another way, and Kluge will probably tell us how to do it right now. I even tried to put it into a function so that it would run. And I was doing that based on the assumption I had done with Bash. So the exact same thing in Bash, although it's a much uglier, is this. So this is the exact same thing in Bash. I've got some other variables in here and stuff like this, and it's really ugly. There's just no doubt that that's ugly. But the difference is that this here, this get ps1 command, is called every time the prompt prints. So it automatically updates. Now, I'm absolutely sure that zshell has a method for doing that. I'm absolutely sure it does. But this difference between Bash and zshell really reminded me of one of the major reasons I've always used Bash. And the major reason I use Bash, Powerline's not an option. God, no. Okay, so and I'll tell you why in a second. So the major reason that I've always used Bash is because it's the default on literally millions, if not billions, of devices. And if you are going to leave the default, whether you like GPL or not, if you're going to leave the default for your interactive shell, then you have to have enough evidence to suggest that the advantages of doing that outweigh the disadvantages of having everything from the default shell. So I will say this, zshell does way better job than Fish from what I've tried. I tried Fish for one day at maintaining what I understand from Kluge, the zshell team has sought to be, muscle memory parity with Bash. And I agree. I agree that has largely been the case. Powerline on Manjaro, you don't know me very well. I will never put Manjaro on a system. It's the fucking devil. This disagreement with the way that this PS command works and the way the PS command in zshell works was not the reason I left. What is the reason that I went back to the default is because this brought home to me the reason that zshell is bad, because zshell is not the default. And in a nutshell, every time I ask somebody, and this is the way I will maintain my approach to zshell. When somebody tells me to use zshell, it's the shit, it's awesome. My response to that is why. And every time I ask why, the answers are always the same. It has Powerline, it has this plugin manager, which according to Kluge, the zshell team doesn't even support or promote. They're like against plugins. Even though the oh-my-zshell thing has had it. The number one answer to that, by the way, is always oh-my-zshell, which is never a reason to use anything. In fact, it's a reason not to use a shell, as far as I'm concerned. And so here's what it comes down to. The number one reason that I'm not going with zshell is because it's not the default. That is the only reason I need to present. Because every other reason to use zshell has to be framed in the situation of why should I leave the default? Because I tell you what, that's okay. It's okay. No, you're fine. So So I'm going to say it. As much as I hate the bash GPL issue, the bash GPL issue doesn't affect me and my interactive shell. It doesn't affect me, so that's not a reason. Again, bash is a default. Z shell doesn't provide any added value that matters to me. In fact, it distracts from those things because it has inferior to command tab completion. I already confirmed that. This is not a major reason, but this is reason enough. Completion in bash is complete-c, capital C, command. I'm done. That particular, thank you. That particular support is not, it does not exist in Z shell. It's overly complicated, and I'm not interested in doing that and changing it, even if I did do it. For me, it detracts from my knowledge, my knowledge of things like the PS prompt. This difference may not seem like an important difference, but to me it is, because I remember the syntax of the PS prompt for bash. If I start using Z shell every day and fucking with the prompt, which is what everybody does, then I'm going to be losing my knowledge of the bash prompt, which is the default. And that's not a decision I want to do. I don't want to make that decision. I want to be fluent in the default on the system. Same reason I pick VI over Emacs. I absolutely do not need a fucking fancy prompt. I think they're a distraction. I've always hated them. I sort of inside laugh at people who have 2-line prompts because they're scientifically proven to be harder for you to focus on the task at hand. People love doing fancy shit in their prompt. That's fine. Have fun. It's not me. And it's not a lot of other serious engineers. And I'm not saying you're not a non-serious engineer if you have a big fancy fucking prompt, but I'll tell you what, it looks like it to me. So the fancy prompt, not only is it unnecessary and unscientific, but it's a burden on the system that's unnecessary and doesn't need to be there. Besides, why would I get my eyes visually used to a fucking crazy prompt? If I get used to looking at the prompt for any information at all, that detracts from my functionality and my ability to operate on another system. In fact, if I could get rid of the most minimal branch stuff, then when I get on another system, I know what's going on, because my eyes already know how to parse the prompt. They're already used to it. So they don't have the cognitive overhead of not having my big, insane fucking power line, which I fucking hate. All right, sorry. The auto load functions, the idea of having a plugin manager for your login shell is just absolutely ridiculous to me. And apparently it's also ridiculous to the Z shell team. Like Kubernetes cluster namespace in the CWD, and that's it. Right. And you're probably a professional who works with this stuff all the time. It will have a bash, and bash isn't going anywhere. Agreed. Auto-loaded functions might be cool, but they're not the default. And so having, using the auto-loaded function system is a significant, difference from my command line, stuff, doing exported functions, and they're not the default. So it's actually better for me to keep memory of the exported function system that comes with bash, because again, it's on millions or trillions, if not billions of systems, and it's already there. If I ever needed to export a function, I know how to do it. I don't have to install Z shell, and I won't become, you have to fast forward to a full year of using Z shell. Imagine me using Z shell for a year or two, and I don't even remember how to do export-f anymore. That's not acceptable to me. Not with the path that I want to go down. Z shell requires additional unnecessary setup. You have to install it. Z shell actually breaks bash compatibility unnecessarily for a few small things. One of those is floating point math, which I'm kind of okay with, but it's a thing. I absolutely, bash has got ugly, horrible syntaxy quirks. Bash shell and shell shock and all that happened to bash. Those issues have all been surpassed. And they've been corrected, even, and I hate them. I hate that there are those quirks in bash, but at least I know them. I'm familiar with the bash quirks. I'm not familiar with the Z shell quirks. So if I get familiar with the Z shell quirks, I get unfamiliar with the bash quirks by default. And therefore I'm less effective on a bash shell, which is going to be the default, particularly for an SRE or system administrator. So another reason for me not to use Z shell. And again, many of these reasons apply to picking VI over Emacs. You're not going to install Emacs on every remote system you might ever be administering, even if there's not that many of them now that we do DevOps and everything we don't have to log into things. So that's pretty much my summary on that. I listed here why you might want to use Z shell. So if you want to use zshell, maybe you like zshell's extra completions functionality. Maybe I'm going to give you some ideas you might actually want to use zshell. Maybe you don't care about using multiple systems and you want to really trick out your command line. Maybe you're on a Mac and you already have zshell. You don't want to rock the boat. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe GPL is a really big deal to you. Maybe you're actually writing zshell scripts for some reason, and you want your scripting knowledge to apply to your zshell scripting knowledge. So I mean, to me, those are all really valid reasons to use zshell. I'm not going to use them. I'm extremely grateful to Kluge and to the others who have been helpful and patient with me as I went through my evaluation. And I have no ill will toward anybody who uses zshell. If anything, I understand more fully now the use case for people who do want to use it, and that includes people who want to use oh-my-zsh. Somebody sent me a prompt. I mean, I don't mean any disparaging remark. Somebody actually in the chat sent me like a 4-line IRC of how I could have the best possible prompt, and I just shook my head inside. I was like, no, just no. Just no. So we come to this with different priorities and with different needs, and that's totally okay. I mean, if you want, I definitely did it. My number one video on YouTube before I did all this stuff was a putty video about how to solarize your putty terminal on Windows and trick out and have a 2-line really awesome prompt. And I did that to try to get kids interested in coding because it looked really hackery. It was really awesome looking. When you're showing a young person the prompt, they're like, and they see just a $sign, they're like, it terrifies them, and it's not cool. There's not enough color on it. There's no emojis or anything, and they don't want to use it. And the fact of the matter is I'm past that. It's not just because I'm old. It's just I don't need it. I don't use IntelliSense in my editors either. I don't, I like color and syntax in my. I mean, Rob Pike will go so far as to say that syntax highlighting is juvenile. He literally says that. I'm not that extreme, but I'm also not. I do not need all of that to be interested to get the job done. And in fact, I think it distracts. So that's ultimately my conclusion. Looks like we finished this video in under 25 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and take some, I'm going to read the chat a little bit, and then we'll wrap up this little video. This will be posted as an independent video on YouTube and as a VOD. So if you want to come back and watch it, but if you want to participate in the conversation, I'm going to zoom in on this, on the chat. Okay. Let's see, zshell quick start kit. I'm on my Arch. Yeah, I'm new here. Sorry, that's fine. It's just for sure. Devil's advocate. Is it default on Macs for a couple of years? IRC. Yeah, zshell is. Actually, zshell has only been the default for a year or two, and before that, they stayed back on Bash 2 or Bash 1 because of the GPL v3. Apple chose to use zshell without a doubt for the licensing issues, and I agree with the licensing issues, even though I fucking hate Apple. They didn't, because the zshell GPL v3 could easily be, turned into, not zshell, the Bash GPL v3 could easily be turned into an attack against Apple, and the FSF is clearly on the rampage trying to do that, and that's why I don't like FSF, nor do I like the GPL v3. I think it's overreaching. It's more of a hardware license than a software license, but that's a separate video. In fact, it's better you just watch Linus Torvalds' video because I completely agree with everything he says. I say I like having a Kubernetes cluster namespace that I can just work right in right away. If you go on any Linux server, it will have Bash. Bash is the default. Agreed. I remember when I switched to zshell, I didn't even know why back in the day. Right. So, and that's fine, probably because someone told you to. Can't argue with that. Going against the long-standing default is fraught with risk. It means every time I set up a new machine, I have to set up zshell, which can involve varying degrees of hassle. And it took a long time to get zshell where I want it. I haven't gotten to that point I'm happy with. Yeah, and there's going to be a lot of people like that. I imagine that if I were to invest more time, and Kluge has been very, very helpful for me to see this. Kluge is the first significant zshell user I have ever encountered in the last year and a half. I just want to say that. And I'm going to say one more time how grateful I am. Because he didn't give me all the regular bullshit. He gave me specific technical answers to very important points. And that was enough to convince me to try it for 2 or 3 days and go through a full port attempt. And I learned a lot about it in the process, and I would not have done that had he not, focused on the issues at hand and devolved into the conversation about whether oh-my-zsh is a thing or not. So I just want to thank him again for that. Uh, and if you like fancy, that's fine too. I gotta drop to bedtime. Take care. I like two line as often deep in folders. I like yeah. People do like two line. I don't. A lot of people like that for that reason. Nothing but a prompt care on the second line. That is the default I noticed for zshell, and I do not like that at all. I don't like that. You'll see me doing LS and PWD all the time, so you might think that I should probably do that because I tend to do that anyway, and maybe I will change on that particular point. Thanks for the follows, guys. But I don't know. I don't. We'll see. Ask me next week. But I really like a minimal prompt personally. And there's one time I had a pretty long prompt there for a while because I was streaming. And so if you are going to have a long prompt, I think streaming is one of the reasons to have that, because you avoid a lot of the LS commands and stuff. If people can see your path, I actually deliberately added a very long half a screen path without wrapping it, because I wanted people to see where I was at any given moment and know what I was working on. And that was for them. That wasn't for me. I was fine with, just seeing the smaller prompt. And in fact, at one point I had just $1. And then I realized that, people really didn't know what project I was working on, and they didn't know what branch I was on. I didn't know what branch I was on. So I started putting more in my prompt at that time. Maybe I need to just, be quiet on the other people who put a fancier prompt, particularly the streamers, because that helps people follow along with what's happening. And there's a good reason to do that. Yep. Let's see here. Fancy myself as a fancy. Honestly, the only reason I'm using zshrc is because it's the default on no Manjaro. Otherwise, I don't bother installing it. Yeah, if it was a default, that just confirms for me another reason I don't want to use Manjaro. I know why they do that. I think they're trying to maintain GPL compatibility. I have other problems with Manjaro that are much deeper than the shitty distro that it is. I still am going to try Arch. I'm going to try Enlightenment as a desktop distro. I'm not on Arch because I'm not confident enough with its default support for streaming, and Pop! OS and Linux Mint are no-brainers when it comes to that. Been using zshell for a few days now. Can't get used to some of the things I used in Bash. Well, I mean, it's worth a try. Like auto remove purge. Yeah. Why do you think one of the greatest hackers is using a Mac and Google Chrome on it? Because you're talking about a pen tester. That's not the greatest hacker. Pen testers are not hackers. They're quality assurance. They're quality assurance engineers who wear fancy hoodies and get paid a lot of money. It doesn't matter. I mean, you can use it. That's fine. Yeah, I think Callie switched to zshell because of all the reasons we're talking about with GPL. I think the GPL stuff is a good reason to change. I think you're going to see more of that. Honestly, do. I think you're going to see more people changing. BeaconBot is on Arch and streams. Yes, he does. He does stream. I know. I'm going to ask him about that. I want to see what he's doing with his stream. I don't know if he's doing the same dual stream that I am, though. But I'm not streaming to YouTube anymore. I was streaming to YouTube and at the same time. So I imagine so. So yeah. Is it fashionable to hate on Arch today because systemd? I don't know what's fashionable to hate on Arch. Look, I use the system because this is a different conversation. So we have 47 seconds left. If you want to talk about operating system choices, we can do that. But that's the operating system question came up with reference to the shell that's the default. So I do think it's important to mention that Kali has, like you guys have said, Kali defaults to zshell, Mac defaults to zshell, Manjaro defaults to zshell. It sounds like most of the Arch distros are defaulting to zshell these days. And I saw a new shell. I did see that. That's the one in Rust, right? Man, how's it going, Red Fox? Who broke all iPhones and PS3 4? Yeah. So yeah, it's so whether or not you use it, it's fine. There are many really amazing things about zshell that I've encountered. I absolutely love the architecture of zshell. I could easily get into using zshell every day. I could totally get into it. I could be totally okay with changing all of my muscle memory over to do Z shell. And I tried that, and I started on that path. But I don't believe today, I don't believe as of today that there is enough argument to drop the default. And given the role that I have for the company that I do, and the number of systems they have, and the number of enterprise systems that use Bash by default, I'm choosing to not do that. And I would rather not cross the streams when it comes to my knowledge of things like exported functions, prompts, and even those little things, which are not, strictly speaking, they're not muscle memory issues. They're Bash RC issues more than anything. And really, that was the thing that killed it for me. When I realized I wasn't going to be able to copy over my Bash RC to another system and use it, I was done. So I can, right now I have like a one-line Bash RC file, and I can SCP that over to any target system that I ever want to use, and it just works. None of those systems are going to be running Arch. None of them. And that's not a thing. And so that's why I want to be able to be operational really quickly. I can get over to any Linux system on planet Earth. I can copy 2 files over and I'm good. Actually 3, but two if I really need to. My vimrc and my one-line vim, my one pay screen file vimrc, and my bash rc. I copy those 2 files over and I'm good. I get my customizations if I want them. Now I still think you should be functional without those things. But being able to just copy SCP 2 files in one command line over to a system and have your entire shell environment that you've become used to, that's a really compelling reason to not leave the default for me. So that's my reason.